be because he mucked up the numbers.
Question number 5, Metiria Turei.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Tēnā koutou e te whare. Ko taku pātai ki te minita mō te taiao. Does he agree with Canterbury Councillor Lan Farm that the way water is allocated does not always prioritise public use over private gain?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The law gives priority to water use for domestic supplies, for firefighting and for stock drinking water. These uses have preferential access over commercial users like irrigators, industry or bottled water companies. Our government has also strengthened the public good considerations in water allocation with New Zealand's first national policy statement on fresh water that requires regional councils to set minimum flows in our rivers for ecological and recreational purposes. We have further work underway on improving New Zealand's freshwater allocation system with a technical advisory group doing work right now on how we can further improve it.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree with Hurunui resident Colleen Johnson, who has put up with a permanently E. coli poisoned water supply and says New Zealanders, we should have first priority, the high quality water should be coming to us?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, with respect to the quality of water supplies, there is a job for councils to improve their performance in that regard, but I would caution the member from saying that as a consequence of water users taking water for irrigation and for other uses that are so important to the economy, that should not compromise in any way New Zealanders' access to good domestic water supplies. I remind the member that total extractive use of water in New Zealand is only 2% of the total resource New Zealand has.
Pātai tāpiri.
A supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister then think it's fair that private companies like water bottlers can access pristine fresh water while the public, like Colleen Johnson and her family, have to put up with E. coli contamination and dirty rivers?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, our law provides for any person being able to apply for a consent for New Zealand's water resources. That same law says that if there's ever a choice between domestic water supplies or essential uses like firefighting, they take preference over commercial uses, and that is appropriate. Now, I am not satisfied that our councils are doing an adequate job of managing New Zealand's freshwater resources. That's why our government introduced the very first national policy statement providing clearer direction on the need for New Zealand to lift its game around freshwater management.
Supplementary question, Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, will he support New Zealand First's policy of any potential charge that is applied volumetrically to consented water takes being confined to a royalty only on the export only of water as water only, and if not, why not?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I have seen New Zealand First proposals for a 10 cents a litre charge on all commercial water users. That would cost our dairy industry $600 billion a year and effectively destroy New Zealand's largest export industry. Those facts just reinforce the fact that in the discussion around allocation and pricing of water, we need to do it with a great deal of care and thought.
Point of order, Richard Prosser.
Mr Speaker, my question was, would the Minister support our policy of a charge being confined to a royalty on export only, not to some other policy that he claims to have seen, which he hasn't, because it doesn't exist?
No, that's now very much a debating point. The member asked whether New Zealand First policy would be supported by the Minister, and the Minister's taken his opportunity of interpreting that policy the way he sees it. It becomes very much a debating point. The general debate follows shortly, and I note New Zealand First has the first option to lead that debate. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
If the Technical Advisory Group on Water recommends putting a charge on its commercial use, will he commit to supporting that recommendation?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
No, the government will consider the report on its merits. And the reality, and I would commend the editorial that was published in the New Zealand Herald this week, that rightly said that any approach to charging of water did need to be done with care, because actually a very large portion of New Zealand's export industries, and a blunt approach like that I've heard from her own party, would do very significant damage to the New Zealand economy.
A supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Does he then think it's right that water bottling company Antipodes pays only $99 a year for the right to bottle water, but charges $7.67 per litre to their customers?
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
The member needs to be careful in making comparisons. For instance, the Auckland Council, which has a very large consent to take water out of the Waikato River, pays a bare administrative fee for a consent that is more than 10,000 times larger than that. And too often, people are confusing the cost of the pumping, the filtration and the piping of water to the natural resource. All users currently are only paying for an infrastructure cost and not a cost for the natural resource.
Point of order, sir.
Point of order, Metiria Turei.
It was a clear question as whether he thinks that is right or not, and he did not answer that question.
No. Can I just take the opportunity of asking members to look at two speakers' rulings that might help them in formulating their supplementary question? The member asked, does the minister think that it's fair? If the member now looks at Speaker's ruling 1956 and 1957, it acknowledges that we do allow opinion questions, but the chances of getting an answer satisfactory to the member are very slight. Supplementary question. Supplementary question, Metiria Turei.
Does the minister think that it's right that water bottling companies tell their overseas clients that they can supply an infinite quantity of clean water, while the New Zealand communities that they take that water from have to put up with boil notices and dirty rivers?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Anybody who claims that they have got a consent for an infinite amount of water clearly do not, because every permit that is granted has some limit, albeit I would draw the member's attention to the fact that water bottling companies make up such a small fraction of New Zealand's overall water take that if we want to have an intelligent discussion about improving New Zealand's water management, it is those very substantive users like irrigators and industry that should be the focus of our attention.
Question number 6, Andrew Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Conservation. What announcements has she made about increased support for the Department of Conservation in Budget 2017?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Maggie Barry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I was